Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. If you're an occupational therapy student, you are in the right place. Today, we're diving into a pretty wild biological paradox: how absolutely brilliant involuntary survival mechanisms can actually turn into hidden roadblocks in a child's development. Let's get right into it.
Before we start looking at surface-level symptoms, things like ADHD, reading delays, or even bedwetting, we really need to ask a foundational question. What if clumsiness, poor posture, and learning delays all share the exact same hidden neurological root? Why do highly intelligent kids inexplicably struggle to just sit still at a desk or catch a ball in the first place?
Well, today we're putting on our clinical detective hats. We've got a tight agenda. First, understanding primitive reflexes. Second, the big 5 survival reflexes. Third, the impact of retained reflexes. Fourth, screening and assessment protocols. And finally, techniques for therapeutic integration.
Okay, moving right into part 1, understanding primitive reflexes and how they form the foundation of movement.
So what are they? Primitive reflexes are automatic, stereotyped movements. They are directed entirely from the brainstem, meaning there is literally zero cortical involvement. Think of them as the neurological scaffolding for early survival. They're involuntary autopilot programs that help a baby physically maneuver through the birth canal, take that very first breath, and basically act as the raw foundation for all future voluntary motor skills.
The timeline here is absolutely crucial. These reflexes begin emerging super early, around 18 weeks in utero. By birth, these survival reflexes are fully online and firing. But here's the catch. As the higher brain centers mature, this reflex scaffolding has to be integrated. It needs to be folded into higher cortical control. This integration process kicks off around 6 months and really should be completely wrapped up by 12 months postnatal.
Right, on to part 2, the big 5 survival reflexes and their core patterns.
First up is the Moro reflex, basically the infant startle response. When a baby experiences a sudden change in sensory stimuli like a loud sound, a bright flash of light, or a sudden drop, their arms whip rapidly outward. This triggers a massive fight-or-flight sympathetic nervous system arousal. It's actually genius because it allows the infant to instinctively summon a caregiver when they feel threatened. Next is the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, or ATNR for short. You'll often hear this called the fencer position. It's triggered by turning the head to the side, so the limbs on the side the face is turned to will extend, and the limbs on the back of the head, the occipital side, will flex. Emerging way back at 18 weeks in utero, this is basically the baby's very first crack at early eye-hand coordination. But it absolutely must integrate, otherwise the growing child won't be able to smoothly cross their visual midline without their limbs involuntarily trying to follow their eyes. Now let's see how this builds into the symmetrical tonic neck reflex, or STNR. This one gets the baby ready to hop up into a quadruped position and start crawling. When the head flexes forward, the lower limbs extend. When the head extends back, the lower limbs flex. So if this reflex lingers past 11 months, it's a huge problem. It severely disrupts vertical eye tracking and makes holding a normal sitting posture just incredibly difficult.
Then we have the tonic labyrinthine reflex, the TLR. This one is driven heavily by the vestibular system in the inner ear. It's an involuntary response to the head falling below or rising above the level of the spine. Ultimately, it's a key builder of early postural muscle tone. It's literally teaching the infant how to manage gravity.
Finally, the spinal galant reflex. If you gently touch the side of the lower spine, it causes an automatic hip rotation on that exact same side. Originally, this helped the fetus wiggle down the birth canal, and it also aided in early infant urination. But imagine trying to sit still in a classroom if the waistband of your pants is constantly triggering your hips to unconsciously twist. It's distracting and honestly profoundly uncomfortable for a kid just trying to focus.
Which brings us to part 3, the impact of retained reflexes. This is where things get tricky.
You'll definitely want to keep these clinical connections in mind. It maps retained primitive reflexes right to the specific observable behaviors you'll see in a clinic. For instance, an unintegrated Moro reflex links straight to hypersensitivity and emotional fatigue. An active ATNR, that maps to reading delays and poor eye tracking. STNR attention looks like constant slouching at a desk. TLR brings poor posture and careless mistakes, and a retained spinal galant is strongly linked to bedwetting well past age 5, plus relentless fidgeting from sensory aversions to clothing.
The burden these unintegrated reflexes place on a child is just massive. They literally steal processing power. They force kids to use conscious, higher-level cortical effort to execute movements that should be completely on autopilot. So what happens? Extreme physical fatigue, clumsiness, and huge learning hurdles. even in super smart kids. A retained Moro reflex, for example, forces the child into a state of chronic stress, which can actually lead to biochemical imbalances, lowered immunity, and just deep systemic exhaustion. All right, part 4, screening and assessment protocols. Let's talk about how we find the roadblock.
To solve these mysteries, we use rigorous, evidence-based tools like Sally Goddard's set of tests and the CPRIM scale. When you're testing the ATNR using the Goddard protocol, you have to break down the physical movements to safely elicit that lingering reflex. You place the child in a quadruped position. You passively and gently rotate their head to the side. You hold it there for exactly 5 seconds, bring it back to the midline, and repeat. You are meticulously checking the biomechanical response of those limbs.
By directly observing them during these tests, you can accurately spot the difference between a matured, integrated nervous system and one that's still fighting against involuntary reflex arcs. An integrated response is beautifully smooth and intentional, but if it's retained, it's a whole different story. You'll literally see the child fighting their own body, involuntary twitching, an inability to hold the position, or even a sudden loss of balance because the brainstem just completely hijacks the movement.
Finally, part 5, techniques for therapeutic integration, or the clinical solution.
Once we spot these neurological roadblocks, we don't just teach the kid how to cope with them. We can actually resolve the tension using proven therapies like the Mascatuva neurosensor motor reflex integration, or MNRI method. The philosophy here is amazing. By tapping into neuroplasticity, we aren't just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms. We're actively inviting the nervous system to re-explore, reroute, and mature its own genetic pathways by replicating early neonatal movements. We are essentially giving the brain a second chance to get it right. The main goal of integration therapy is to shift control away from the primitive brainstem and move it up into the higher cortical centers. By doing this, we free the child's mind. We allow them to stop wasting processing power on simply trying to sit up straight and redirect all that great energy toward conscious learning, emotional regulation, and cognitive growth.
The clinical pathway here relies on a very precise, repetitive physical sequence. First, you trigger the sensory receptors with a precise tactile stimulus. Second, you help the body actively or passively replicate the pure innate motor pattern. Third, use progressive repetition, we're talking 10 to 15 times, to actively myelinate the axons of those sensory and motor neurons. And finally, you link this newly automated reflex response with conscious inner control to build stable, long-term motor memory. So I'll leave you with a final thought to carry into your future practice as an occupational therapist. Will you just manage the surface symptoms of clumsiness and learning delays? Or will you look deeper to remove the hidden neurological roadblocks? Ultimately, by mastering the assessment and integration of primitive reflexes, you hold the power to fundamentally unlock a child's full motor, cognitive, and emotional potential. Thanks for hanging out for this explainer, and keep exploring.